Hi class, welcome back to Biomedical SX. Today we'll be finishing up our discussion concerning ethical issues that arise when we use animals for research. And next week we will be moving on to discussions surrounding the use of humans in research contexts. So again, my lecture will hopefully only be about 20 minutes because I want plenty of time for us to discuss case studies. So I'll be briefly recapping the three ethical positions that we talked about this week: Peter Singer's utilitarianism approach, Tom Regan's rights-based approach, and Bernie Rollins' telos approach. Remember that with the short-circuiting of the historical social consensus ethic, we have several contenders, ethical theories that could replace that ethic. So we should discuss which of these ethical theories should indeed reign supreme. And then we'll be discussing two case studies. One is concerning 2013 decision by NIH to phase out chimpanzees research. It was highly contentious with supporters on both sides. So I'm curious what the three ethical positions would state concerning this phasing out process and what you think would be the right thing to do. And we'll also finish up with a discussion concerning the use of animals in military training as well. All right, so as we discussed in the beginning of the week, there are three potential contenders for replacing the historical social consensus ethic concerning animal use. Peter Singer, it's all about utility. He's a total utilitarian. He will apply utilitarianism to every single case study. Then we have Tom Regan, who's pushing back against Peter Singer's utilitarianism. And then we have Bernie Rollins. He's like, what about natural behavior? What about, the welfare of the animals? So to briefly go over Singer argues that if a being can suffer, it has an interest in avoiding suffering, and its interests should be treated equally to the similar interests of other beings. And we talked about this on Monday and Wednesday. So Singer's basically arguing that animals should be placed in the ethical sphere and thus should be included in the utilitarian calculus. So we should simply, again, ad nauseum, include all the benefits and harms to all beings that are impacted, and that action which brings about the greatest good for the greatest number should be the action which reigns supreme. Now, as Singer is a utilitarian, it's important to note that he argues that animal testing can be justified, which actually comes as quite a surprise to many of the popular supporters of Singer, who oftentimes assume that Singer would support a ban on animal testing. Singer's like, no. Animal testing can be justified, provided that there are no other ways to obtain the information, the welfare of the animal is taken into account to limit suffering, and that the suffering is outweighed by any long-term benefits that are produced. Well, this particular position rubbed Tom Regan the wrong way. And Tom Regan's like, utilitarianism is not the right way to go here because it doesn't value the animal. So Regan argues that all experiencing subjects of a life should be thought of as possessing moral rights. Now here, an experiencing subject of a life is quote, a conscious creature having an individual welfare that has importance to it, whatever its usefulness to others. So if you can undergo pleasure and pain, experience satisfaction, or have a sense of self, then for Regan, you are an experiencing subject of a life and you have certain key rights. One of those key rights is respect for your choices and autonomy. So for Regan, all the creatures that possess or are experiencing subjects of a life include mentally normal adult mammals. So you have basic moral rights for Regan then, including the right to life and liberty, and at the very least, including having your autonomy respected. So they shouldn't be treated as a means, but they should be treated as an end in themselves. And my dog Turtle is like, oh, heck yeah, this is right. So Regan has the most stringent of the three positions, where Singer argues that some animal experimentation is acceptable, Reagan argues that no animal experimentation is acceptable. No animal testing, no industrial agriculture, and even pet ownership is problematic because it is reducing animals to a means and not respecting that animals are an end in themselves, right? So that was a whirlwind overview of the first two positions that we discussed on Monday and on Wednesday. Now, Bernie Rollin wants to push back against both. He finds both the rights-based approach problematic and Peter Singer's utilitarianism view problematic. And he argues, listen, we've developed symbiotic relationships with animals for thousands of years. We have built communities of non-human others that live and thrive with us. And as such, we need an ethic that recognizes both the wildness of animals and their connection to us. So Bernie Rollin argues that we should accept a more Aristotelian position called respect for telos. And he argues that we should follow this maxim to respect telos. And the maxim is roughly that if we have dealings with animals, we need to respect their needs and desires. Now, telos is a Greek word with an over 2,000-year history, and it can roughly be translated as purpose, end, or goal, right? And the idea that Aristotle had when he coined the term telos was the idea that there are certain goals or purposes that are built into the very nature of what makes us what we are, right? So the telos of a knife is to cut. Its purpose is to cut. The telos of an acorn is to become an oak tree. That's part of its nature, to develop from seed into a tree. The telos of humans for Aristotle were to reason, and the telos of, say, a chicken would be all of those natural behaviors that are built into what it means to be a chicken, to roost, to lay eggs, to build nests, etc. And so when we are having dealings with animals, when we are interacting with non-human animals, we should respect these desires and purposes that are built into their nature. So he argues that, listen, he's like, utilitarianism is not completely wrong, right? And, Reagan, there is something to be said about whether or not we should use animals for animal testing. But there are 3 layers of ethical concern regarding invasive research on animals, right? Well, there's the question concerning whether we should use animals in ways that harm, hurt, or distress them in research for human benefit. But it seems like we have a social consensus ethic that says that this is largely okay, because on the one hand, many people support basic research, the development of effective medications, and the assurance that procedures and medications are safe. They want all of these things, and this requires the use of animals in the research context. So, yes, Reagan is correct that the principle of autonomy cannot be met here. But we seem to be arguing that this question should be bracketed, at least a portion of the population. And we can question whether or not it's acceptable to bracket, but Rollin is arguing that we should bracket this question. And if we bracket the question concerning whether we should use animals in ways that harm, hurt, or distress them in research for human benefit, then 2 other ethical concerns arise. First, yes, Peter Singer is correct. We must ensure that the benefits outweigh the costs of the research, right? So we should not do research all willy-nilly just to see, just for marginally useful information, to obtain marginally useful information. We should be utilizing animals when the research project is important, when the benefits outweigh the costs. And then if we take that as an acceptable position to go from, ethical responsibility does not end there. Then the 3rd layer of ethical concern arise, which is that common sense and common decency dictate that animals used in research should be treated as well as possible. So on the one hand, we have people supporting the use of animals in basic research and for the development of effective medications. But on the other hand, no one wants to imply that animals must suffer fear, distress, and pain. So if we look at the third area of ethical concern, if we agree that we should be utilizing animals for research, then we should ensure that animal welfare standards are in place. So this situation, therefore, leads to a number of questions. Does research really require as many animals? Can we reduce the number of animals? Can animal testing be conducted in a way that animals do not feel distress or pain? Can the experiment be refined? And can testing be done without animals? And so this brings up what's called the 3 R's, which are guiding principles for the ethical use of animals in testing, and utilized both in the United States and European context. The 3 R's basically mandate that we should replace, reduce, and refine when possible. Choose methods that avoid or replace the use of animals in research when it is efficient to do so. Use methods that enable researchers to obtain comparable levels of information from fewer animals or obtain more information from the same number of animals. So reduce the number of animals when possible. And refine. Use methods that alleviate or minimize potential pain and suffering or distress and enhance animal welfare for the animals used. So these are 3 rules of thumb that can be applied to any research that involves animals, and it prompts the researchers to make changes when possible that would positively impact the welfare of the animals. So the 3 R's encourage alternatives to animal testing, aim to improve the animal welfare and the scientific quality of the research being performed, and to minimize pain and stress. In many countries, especially in Europe, the 3 R's are explicit in legislation that typically governs animal use. Now, in addition, there are also the 3 pillars or domains of animal welfare that are often used or drawn upon by IACUC, the Institutional Animal Care and Use, committees that were developed after the Animal Welfare Act was passed. And this argues that we should ensure that certain standards are in place when utilizing animals in research context. We need to ensure that standard veterinary health indicators, that bodily consistency and bodily health is maintained, that when possible, species typical behaviors are allowed. If, say, for example, you're utilizing chickens, be sure that they can roost and build nests, etc., to ensure that their natural behaviors or their telos is being respected, and that they're not mentally stressed. There are enrichment opportunities to ensure that their mental health is taken care of as well. All right, so to the case studies. That was a very quick overview, 15 minutes. I did it in record time. Woohoo! So the 2 case studies that we are talking about today include phasing out chimpanzees for research. So in 2013, the National Institute of Health, NIH, decided to retire most of the several hundred government-owned chimps still living in research laboratories. So what this essentially meant was that we no longer have colonies of chimpanzees that can be utilized for research purposes in the United States. Now, historically, these animals were pivotal for developing hepatitis B vaccines and have been used to study malaria and other ailments that impact human populations. And for this reason, they originally decided to keep a colony of 50 animals for future research. But 2 years later, in 2015, they abandoned this plan. And Francis Collins, the president of NIH, argued that chimpanzees share 98% of our DNA, and they deserve special respect, reducing their use in research. is scientifically sound and the right thing to do. And that is Francis Collins playing the guitar. All right, so I have a brief video just illustrating the case study. Hopefully this will play.
This is James Anderson. He oversees the chimp management program at the National Institutes of Health, where chimps were used in biomedical research to study diseases and test medicines and vaccines.
They're really the closest species to humans, so they've been useful to understand some aspects of human biology and disease processes. They've been used for a little over half a century. They've been most useful, I would say, in developing vaccines for hepatitis A and B, which are basically non-existent in the country now because of the vaccines.
And they were used a lot in HIV research as well.
They were initially, and the premise there was we assumed that the human HIV came from a chimpanzee virus.
And did it actually turn out to be a good animal model?
It doesn't. They don't typically develop AIDS.
In 1995, after researchers discovered chimps weren't useful for HIV research, the NIH canceled its chimp breeding program. Then, in 2011, an NIH commission concluded that chimps were no longer needed in invasive medical research, which was banned in 2015. But that left the NIH with a unique problem. What to do with all those chimps? The NIH owns millions of lab animals, and in the vast majority of cases, it euthanizes them once they stop being scientifically useful. But for humankind's genetic cousin, Congress made an exception and passed the Chimp Act.
Where these chimpanzees who are no longer needed for research can spend the remainder of their lives in humane sanctuaries,
setting up a retirement system which costs about $10 million a year to maintain.
We just don't euthanize chimps. It's just out of respect to their proximity to humans.
There's no regulation, essentially, that bans these chimps from being euthanized, right?
Yeah, I would have to check. It's just not our policy. We don't do that.
The main federal sanctuary is Chimp Haven.
Amy, 2, Lindsay, and Michelle, we're ready for the Butler Habitat release.
10-4, release of Magnum's group into the Butler Habitat. All action check.
So this is Magnum right here. He is the alpha male.
The federal government pays 75% of the cost associated with housing its chimps at Chimp Haven. The rest of its funding comes from the public and other American institutions, like noted animal lover Bob Barker. And what kind of biomedical research were they using?
Most of the issues that we actually deal with the chimpanzees are related to aging. Some of the chimps have been used in HIV and hepatitis studies, and that can sometimes affect their immune systems. Some of the things that we deal with the most are heart disease. Heart disease is the #1 killer of great apes in captivity. Then we have things like obesity and diabetes and arthritis.
But moving just half of the 518 NIH chimps to Chimp Haven has taken more than 10 years, much longer than some would like. Why aren't all the chimps that the NIH owns here right now?
So there's still over 200 chimpanzees that are remaining in research facilities. And in order to bring them here, we're going to need to expand our facilities.
We didn't know that all the chimpanzees in research would be retired. In fact, I didn't think that would happen within my lifetime.
You ready? You ready?
Yes.
But for the chimps who've already made it to Chimp Haven, retirement from a life in research is a pretty sweet deal.
If you think about chimps in the wild in Africa, they're traveling constantly. They're encountering a lot of novelty. And so it's really important to keep them mentally active here. So this is Keely here. Come on, Keely, my star.
They keep the chimps engaged through something called positive reinforcement training.
Yeah, Mike. Show them your teeth. Good girl. Ready? Chest. Good girl.
Dr. Raven Jackson Jewett is the veterinarian who cares for all 230 chimps. She says Chimp Haven is the best place for America's aging great apes to retire. What do you think of the fact that you're working with essentially an aging population that, with the ultimate goal that eventually they will die out and there will no longer be retired chimps that have been used in biomedical research?
We can't change the past. The research has occurred in them, but we want to make sure that we can give them the lives that they deserve. And ultimately, because they are aging, death is going to happen. It's the inevitable. My job is just to make sure that they have the best quality of life.
Okay, so this brings up a whole host of issues. So in 2010, under pressure from lawmakers, NIH was asked the Institute of Medicine, or the IOM, to review the need for chimpanzees in research. And as we saw in 2013, that meant that chimpanzees were removed from the research context, at least in governmentally funded facilities. And in 2015, we have chimpanzees being retired. So imagine that you've been selected to be a member of this panel. What would each of the ethical positions recommend? Reagan, Singer, and Rollin. And do you think chimpanzees should be phased out of research? If not, what standards should be in place? And should we retire the remaining colony of chimps? Another question as well concerns whether or not animals should be automatically euthanized once they are no longer scientifically viable as well. I'm very much interested in what your view is concerning this phasing out process, because as I said, it was a highly contentious issue with people on both sides. Some arguing that we need, at the very least, to maintain a emergency colony of chimpanzees, and other people arguing that chimpanzee research should be phased out more dramatically in both private and publicly funded research as well. I also have just an overview of animal research at Cambridge. And it will go through, or this video goes through, some of the research being performed utilizing rats and utilizing primates as well. So you might find this interesting. And finally, we have a live tissue training study. The military was required to justify using animals in medic training after pressure from activists. Let's see.
Ryan, what's Reggie's pulse?
69.
Really? Because Wilbur's at 102, and I'm pretty sure that's bad.
Name's like an ox. Hers is 52.
Hey, no cute names. They're not pets. They're subjects. It's not our job to get all affectionate. It's our job to keep them alive.
So the attending, who somehow thinks we're incapable, can choke on his words at the end of the day.
So I don't want to hear Wilbur, babe. You want to call them something, call them sausage.
Or prosciutto.
Wilbur's crashing.
What? What did you do?
I gotta reopen that thoracotomy. Pull that chest tray back over here.
Give me the status on Reggie and Patty.
Reggie's fine. Patty's pulse ox is low but stable.
And babe?
Holding steady. I thought we weren't supposed to give them names.
I could give them numbers, but then I'd probably tell you 3 needs antibiotics and find you shoving a needle in Gray's ass.
His vitals are getting worse, damn it.
Did you check his lung again?
I already took out an entire lobe.
What about his systemic
Let's
aorta?
can at Lexopedia. I've tried everything.
Pulseless. That's it. We need to get more exposure.
You opening him up more?
I need everyone's help. Stem to stern.
What if he can't take it? You could kill him.
Don't get emotional. Just get ready to start massaging his heart. Scalpel. Okay. Suction. Cleared out. Okay, release clamps. Hold on. Right in here.
Still nothing.
No pulsation.
Come on.
Reperfusion complete.
Heart's beating on soon.
All right. Everyone, hell of a job.
Babe is indestructible. She lost a part of her liver and small bowel, but she's been doing fine. We had to cross-clamp a Wilbur's aorta and massage his heart. I couldn't locate the source of his bleeding until I found a hole in his diaphragm and realized he had a splenic laceration. He's a fighter. He's flying through. Reggie had some oozing after his colon resection, but we packed it, and he's been stable ever since. Patty almost bled out because his carotid was sliced right through, but we put in a graft, and he's been stable ever since. He's good as new.
That's good. It's great work, all of you. So put them out and make sure that you write up all your work.
What do you mean, put them out?
Terminate them, the pigs, kill them.
Okay. Okay, so that was a live dramatic, well, not live, but it was a dramatic reinterpretation of live tissue training. So the military has been using animals for medical training since 1983, and indeed since the Vietnam War, but it's recently received scrutiny. By order of Congress in 2013, this was a landmark year, evidently, for animal issues in Congress. The Pentagon was required to present lawmakers with a written plan to phase out live tissue training and to justify their use of live tissue training. So what would Singer, Reagan, and Rollin argue concerning live tissue training? And as an aspiring medical professional, do you think the benefit outweighs the suffering in this instance? You know, you're training medics for combat situations. Is it ethically acceptable to participate in live tissue training, especially when simulators are available? And are the simulators a good replacement here? And what would someone following a 3R approach argue here, right? So again, there were compelling arguments on both sides of this issue. So I'm curious what you guys would think. All right, so please take some time to discuss these two case studies on the discussion board. I hope that you guys have a great weekend. And yeah, next week we're onwards to human research questions and concerns. So thank you guys very much. If you have any questions, let me know and take care.